our webinar on SmartGuard Auto Mode technology, MiniMed 670G system. Why choose a pump that has auto mode? Our guest speakers tonight are Jane Overland and Rob Palmer. Jane is our nurse practitioner who works with total diabetes care and is a consultant for Medtronic. Jane's been helping people manage their type 1 diabetes for nearly 30 years and has a real passion for helping them live their life to the full. Thanks for being here tonight, Jane. And Rob's been living with type 1 diabetes for 35 years now, and he's here tonight to share his experience and his stories with us on the 670G mini system. Thank you. Let's get started.
All right, it's a ripper.
Let's go. Okay, so Rob, you've lived with diabetes for 35 years. I'm sure it's not news to you that no 2 days are the same.
Nope, that is correct. I was 7 when I was first diagnosed. That was a traumatic diagnosis, initially. My first blood sugar ever was 74 when I was put in the Royal Children's Hospital. And that was, after a big family trip to Queensland. We went up, came back, and I just thought the wheels fell off completely. And, I ended up skinny as a rake and in hospital for a month or two. But then, of course, once you start living with insulin, it's amazing how good things can be. So, still a challenge.
Yeah, so we do know that our insulin requirements change over time. So, for example, when you were a teenager, you would have needed a lot more insulin because you were growing than when you do as an adult. But the thing is, even as an adult, I know your days are very varied, but even for someone who goes into the same job every day, has the same lunch break, may eat the same food, our insulin requirements are different, especially our background insulin requirements are different.
Well, there's times when you would do the same thing 2 days back to back, and you inexplicably your blood sugar would go, a completely different direction. And I sometimes attribute it to emotion, right?
Well, we know there are numerous things that affect your blood glucose level. So it's not just what you eat and your exercise. It's whether you're stressed, whether you're fighting a virus. There are so many things that impact on how much insulin we require. And one of the things that you've lived with type 1 diabetes for 35 years. I've been working with people with type 1 diabetes for 30 years. And one of the things that I've really noticed since people have been using the 670 is that your basal insulin requirements day to day are so different. And, all this time we've tried to give you, either a set dose of long-acting insulin and expected it to do the job.
I remember going to the doctor where you would sit down and they'd look at the 7 blood sugars you did a day that you'd mark on your little book, and you'd put them in there and you'd go in and they'd say, gee, you look like you're trending high at 6 in the evening, right? And then they'd make a minute adjustment to your long-acting insulin and hope that was going to solve all your problems.
And then they'd see you in 3 months' time.
Yeah, that's right. And it just couldn't, because it was so, the attention to those changes in your routine was so minimal that you just couldn't possibly make it work.
Absolutely. So this is where the SmartGuard Auto technology comes in. And the way that it works, so once you're in auto mode, the only information in your pump that the pump uses is your insulin to carbohydrate ratio. So your sensitivity and your basal insulin, that's all recalculated at midnight. Okay, so at midnight, it looks back at what insulin did you use over the last 24 hours, and it works out a new sensitivity for you. And in terms of your basal insulin, let's say that today you use 40 units of insulin per day. So the pump goes, okay, well, about half of that would have been basal, so that's 20. So tomorrow, Rob may need 20 units of insulin as his basal insulin requirements, but who knows, he might be really stressed and he might actually need 60, or he might be really active, he might only need 10. So it's got this variance of where it feels comfortable.
So if at the time, the next day, if things are drifting in a direction that wasn't the same as yesterday, it can make those adjustments.
Absolutely. In fact, so if we can just have a look at the, can we just have a look at the slides for a second? Because I just want to see the next one, just so that we can show you what we mean. So, and next. Beautiful. So remember seeing this screen?
Oh, okay. Gee, a picture helps.
So this is, so what the pump is going to do. So it works out what insulin you should require, and then it relies on the sense of glucose.
Yeah.
And there's an algorithm that takes into consideration where your sense of glucose is, where it's moving, what insulin you've got on board, what your sensitivity is, for example, and it just micropulses your basal insulin. So if your glucose is starting to come down.
Okay, can I read that little picture for you, Jane? Right. So
great.
At the very start on the left, you can see at the bottom there's a little knife and fork. It's hard to see it as a knife and fork, but it is.
Yeah.
And that's that yellow dot at the bottom.
Yeah.
So that was where you've told your body, I am going to have some food soon.
Exactly.
And you've bolused at that point.
Exactly.
Now, by the look of that, if I'm just, this isn't me just quietly, anyway, that they've waited a little while, but maybe waited too long because the blood sugar was actually dropping right down towards the low area.
Yeah.
And then once they've decided to eat, the BSL or the sensor glucose levels come back up. And as it's come back up, the pump has realised that there may be more food going in than insulin was given, and it's given a little insulin dose there, those two pink dots above it, just between 9 and 10 at the top. So it said, right, here comes some bolus, and then the blood sugars plateaued, started to drop ever so slightly over the next hour and a half. It's an awesome little looking line, that. And the pump has seen that there's no need for a background or a basal insulin because the glucose level is sitting beautifully.
That's right.
And it's just deleted it until at such a point a couple of hours later where the blood glucose levels started to go up. And it said, here comes a rising blood sugar, here comes your background insulin.
That's right.
And it's basically going to cap that off, hopefully before it gets to that top of that green zone, and plateau and maybe drop it back down into between 6 and 8, which is where it wants to be.
Yeah, that's right. So it's
awesome.
giving these little micro boluses, and what we can't see there with those pink dots is how much it's giving, okay?
Yeah.
So on occasion.
I see.
Okay, so the pumps worked out how much, well, the algorithms worked out how much insulin it feels safe giving you over a period of time, okay?
Cool.
Now, if, for example, it's been giving you the maximum amount of insulin it feels comfortable giving you for 4 hours and your glucose is not responding the way that the pump thinks it should be responding.
You might have had a sneaky sandwich without telling the pump.
Well, it could be a whole lot of different things. So it's not so there's a blue shield. You might have noticed to start off with, there was a blue shield.
When you're in auto mode.
When you're in auto mode, there's a blue shield, okay?
Yep.
Now, if you've been getting minimal amount of insulin for a couple of hours or maximum amount of insulin as basal insulin for 4 hours, the algorithm's going to go, I actually need some more information to make sure we're safe. So you'll go from a blue shield to a grey shield. Now, a grey shield...
That's when it's asking you to tell it what your blood sugar is.
Exactly. So a grey shield does not mean it's thrown you out of auto mode.
Yeah.
It's just saying, okay, I'm just going to give you enough insulin to keep you safe.
Yeah.
Can you please tell me where your blood glucose is so I can see whether I need to adjust my algorithm?
It's like a double check.
It's a double check.
Measure twice, cut once.
Absolutely. So you want to be in blue most of the time, but there's this safety net so that if your sensor is not responding or if your body is not responding to that insulin, you'll go to a grey shield.
Yeah, and you can do a little bit of self-management to work out exactly why and then fix everything up.
So generally what will happen is your pump will let you know you've gone to a grey shield
and
you get your pump out and it'll tell you what it needs. Okay?
Yeah, I've seen it. Please enter BG.
Yeah, or it may be that you need to do a sensor calibration, for example.
Sure.
So it'll always tell you what you need.
Yeah.
So you can go from the blue shield to the grey shield, do what the pump asks you to do, and you go back to the blue shield. So going to the grey shield does not mean you're back in manual mode, okay? You've got a period of time to do what the pump asks you. So if you're driving up the coast to your new job on the radio and you feel your pump vibrate, you don't have to pull over. You can wait till you get where you're going, then get your pump out.
And then suss it out.
Suss it out, do what's needed.
That's right, because I'm driving. I don't want the pump driving while I'm driving.
Okay. So there is this period of time where you get to give the pump the information it needs to take you back into auto mode.
Cool.
So it's still giving you basal insulin, It's giving you amount of basal insulin that it thinks is safe, but it's not making that minute by minute adjustment.
Yep.
It's keeping you safe.
Yep. Cool.
You want to go back into the auto mode where it gives you that minute by minute adjustment as soon as you possibly can.
Yeah, right.
Does that make sense?
Certainly does.
Okay.
Basically, you got auto mode for a certain period,
Yeah.
and if it's been trying to fix you for 4 hours, not fix you, but trying to adjust your blood sugar level or your glucose level, and it hasn't been successful, it will say, hey, mate, have I got this right? Can you please give me some information?
Yeah. So,
and then you're away.
So it might have been that you ate something and you forgot to give a bolus.
Yep.
Or it might be that you've got an infusion set problem.
Might have been that I was standing on a stage in front of 800 people and about to give a speech, because quite often a little bit of adrenaline can do awful things to your blood glucose level.
Sure.
Right?
And if you're talking for a long period of time and you've got that high level adrenaline for a long period of time, it just wants to know that it's giving you the right amount of insulin.
Yeah.
Yep.
I get excited all the time. And yeah, all the time. And it does affect your blood sugar. So, when things are really going, you can find that what the pump thinks it has to do is not quite what it needs to do.
That's
so
right.
You're saying basically it's asking for permission.
And the really impressive thing is, if we can just go to the next slide, the really impressive thing is, if you look at this.
Here we go. I love pictures.
So the top, that's the left-hand side of the screen, isn't it?
Correct.
Okay, on the left-hand side of the screen up the top.
I used to do that too. Hold them both up in front of you, Jane. The one that makes an L is the left.
Thank you so much. You can see up there how it's showing you what's been happening over time. Are you used to looking at one of those graphs, one of those blue graphs?
Yeah, the blue one. Yeah. So you basically, the bulk of your readings are within that dark blue zone.
That's right.
There's some readings that are in between the two lines where there's white in between the blue lines.
Yeah. Okay, so on the right of the screen up the top, can you see the tracing of the blood glucose, the sensor glucose, and see how it's going up and down?
Yep.
And no 2 days are the same.
No, they are not.
Are they? Okay, let's come down the bottom.
Yep.
So this is when auto mode was turned on.
Yeah, right.
So look at that blue area, like on the left-hand side, look at that blue area. See how narrow it is?
Yeah.
So that's the range of the blood glucose. Or
yeah,
sensor
it's pretty
glucose.
awesome.
It's pretty awesome, isn't it?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Something's going on in the middle of the day. Is that the middle of the day? Right in the middle of that bottom left?
But it's still looking pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the right-hand side down the bottom.
Yes.
Okay, so you can see there's a black bar at the first 2 days. So that's where this person was actually in manual mode, and then she switched over to auto mode. And look how much less variation there is in her day-to-day glucose.
Yeah. So on the right-hand side of that screen, up the top is prior to auto mode.
That's manual mode. And that's manual mode.
And that is, and you know what you find in manual mode is that you chase yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
You're pumping insulin at certain times to try and chase the snake kind of thing.
But it's not just you, okay? Your body's insulin requirements are changing all the time. We expect a set amount of basal insulin over a 3-hour or 4-hour block to do a trip.
Gotcha. Yes, yeah, of course.
Okay?
Yep.
Whereas now, in auto mode, it's making those micro adjustments.
It's quite amazing. Once that black line stops and you've switched to auto mode.
Yeah, most of that fluctuation is within that green, within that target range.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like it.
Okay.
Nice work.
So,
we're back.
Stunned. Okay. So it's really important to sort of set expectations when people are going on to the 670, don't you think?
Yes.
Okay.
There are, you know what, there's setting expectations, and there's also that, well, I guess we're going to get to that.
Yeah.
Is the whole.
What are the tips?
Tips.
Okay.
Because I've worked out a couple of tips.
Good. I'm going to share those in a moment.
Set some expectations for me, Jane.
So first of all, even if you haven't been using continuous glucose monitoring before, I think you need to be on continuous glucose monitoring for a week or so you become proficient in changing your sites.
That is an eye-opener in itself.
Yep.
Using a CGM for the first time in combination with a pump for the first time, it'd be sensory overload, right? Yeah. You're like jumping out of a plane without a parachute. You go, oh, this is awesome, but you wouldn't know how to win the ball.
Exactly. So you've got to get used to that to start off with, okay? But the pump needs, or the algorithm needs at least 48 hours worth of data to work out what your average insulin requirements are. Now, ideally, it's a lot longer than that. I don't like to really switch someone over for about 5 days. So we get a really good feel for the variation in your day-to-day insulin requirements.
So over that time, the pump's collecting data from you.
That's right. So you may remember we met 1 week.
So why can't we start this thing today?
And I said no. And then we met the next week.
Yes.
And it was quite a smooth ride for you after the first 24 hours, but we'll talk about that in a moment.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So success isn't always spontaneous. And you might, am I allowed to share the 3 texts that you sent me overnight?
Yeah, go on then.
Okay. I think, Rob, if I remember correctly, you hadn't calibrated before you went to bed. So the pump asked you for calibration.
Yep.
And you hadn't carb counted quite as close as we need you to carb count. So you had to give a correction.
Okay, it's all coming back to me. Yeah, I remember.
So you sent me a text saying that this pump needed more attention than your first girlfriend. And then we had a chat the next day.
Yeah, that's how it felt.
Yeah, and once we've got, like, there are some basics that we need to do, aren't there?
Yeah, there are.
So it's really important to be able to carb count.
Yeah. Can I say there's an app that, what's that app that you said to get?
Calorie King.
Calorie King. Hello.
Yeah.
Calorie King's pretty cool. Although I think there's a lot of stuff that's not there, but I couldn't find as a generic thing. So
you've just got to get your best bet. But I remember you sent me a text and said, okay, so how many carbs are there in a meat pie and a large coffee and tomato sauce?
Yep.
I'll put 30 grams into my pump.
I remember this day.
And I quickly looked it up on Calorie King and I worked it out to be something like 78 grams of carbohydrate.
Yeah. I wanted to tear the pump a new one at that point because I thought I've put in the carbs and I've done what I've been told. I waited my 20 minutes and my blood sugar shot up.
Yeah.
But I'd given half.
You're a really quick learner. You're a really quick learner because you got it spot on straight after that. So you need to be able to count carbs. You can be 25% out.
Yeah.
Just not 225% out.
225% out. It's pretty good.
And you mentioned needing to bolus 20 minutes beforehand.
Yeah. Well, the things that I found, right, so if you get your carb count right, you're giving yourself the best chance.
Yeah.
If you've got the right carb ratio, right, is the other thing. So we made an adjustment, didn't we, to my carb ratio?
That's a really important point. So we do find that most people need their carb ratios intensified when you move across. So that's a really good point. So if you're not getting perfection in the first week or so, it's because we've still got to make some changes, but it's your carb ratio that we need to change.
And it was just a minor change, right? Okay. So instead of having so many units of insulin per 15 grams of carb, we just made that little adjustment. And my grandfather always used to say, he's a sailor, he'd say, little corrections, Robbie, for little mistakes. And that was when he was teaching me how to steer a boat. Yeah. So, just don't overcorrect and you don't make such huge mistakes.
Okay, so what you need to do, first of all, you need to calibrate the sensor, okay? Now, because the pump is using information from the sensor to make management decisions, the sensor actually wants some reference points, and that's what calibrating is. And remember that before you go to bed, you want to see the blue shield and the green circle.
Correct.
So the green circle means that you've given it all the calibrations it needs for you to sleep through the night. Yeah,
I love green circles and stuff. It's like the spaceship's on its way to the moon and everything's looking good.
So you do need to do 2 blood glucose levels a day to calibrate the sensor.
Yep.
You need to be able to put the carbs in and bolus about 20 to 30 minutes before you eat.
Yep.
Okay. You need to correct still, don't you?
Yes.
So the basal insulin, when you correct, you don't correct right down to the midpoint. You correct down to 8.3.
Yep.
And then the basal insulin will take over. And so it sort of gives you a soft landing.
Yeah, I've noticed that it when it does suggest a correction, that it doesn't happen that often, just quietly, but when it does suggest a correction, it doesn't seem to be enough.
Yeah, because it's not trying to bring you right down.
That's right.
Okay, it's going to give you a soft landing because what's happened in the past, remember?
Yeah, I do. Don't worry. They've rushed straight off the top of that roller coaster.
Overcorrect and you go straight through what you wanted to be and land down the other side.
Yeah, you shoot to the dungeon pretty quick.
So the basal insulin can gently bring you down.
Yep.
And look, it probably would bring you down from 15, but it would take too long.
That's right, because I'm trying to keep myself at 85% in range.
Exactly. So you give a correction and you trust the pump. Okay, really important to trust the pump. The pump actually knows what it's doing.
Yep.
And you mentioned that we had to change the insulin to carb ratio.
Yes.
So it's really important that you can upload to CareLink, and that, you know, I have, you know, for example, you upload.
Well, that's right. You and I talking, Jane, has been incredibly beneficial, because, you know, I would struggle to make those decisions and to make the decisions in the quantities that we have to get things right without making a big mistake. So for us to be able to talk, and for you to say, right, let's just make that little adjustment and that little adjustment, and we make those, and the results are really great, because you watch the difference, right? And you can see the difference immediately. So getting your carbs right, that's number one for sure. Number two is making sure your carb ratio is correct. Actually, they're not number 1, 2, and 3. They're all sort of the same importance, aren't they? But also that time between when you give a bolus and when you have something to eat, because what I find is that if my glucose has risen sharply because I've had food too close to my bolus, I find that when it's high, insulin almost doesn't work as efficiently.
It doesn't. Right? The insulin is much better at stopping you rise than bringing you down once you get high.
Yeah, that's right.
So the goal is don't get too high.
Who hasn't noticed that when you've had what you should have for lunch, you wait a little bit longer and you're hypo before you know it, right? Because your insulin's working and you haven't eaten. Whereas if you had that same insulin and your blood sugar was 12 or 13, you'd be lucky to get to 10 without a crumb. So, yeah, it is a thing, I think, that your body doesn't use. Yeah.
And one of the things we're going to have to do with you now, because you've been in auto mode all the time, okay, so we've got this intensified insulin to carb ratio. What we now have to do is go back and change your manual mode basal rates, because if you were to go out of auto mode, not that I think you ever will.
Not that I ever will.
With that intensified insulin to carb ratio, unless I cut back your basal, you may have some low. So that's why CareLink is so important.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And I think the final, there's more, but one of the things too is I used to say to people, never suspend your pump, because if you forget to turn it back on.
Unless it's caught fighting in the playground.
Yeah. Sorry. Anyway, so you actually, like if you're just jumping in the shower, you can just disconnect and reconnect, okay?
Yes.
But if you're coming off it for, say, an hour.
So when I go surfing, right, sometimes I'll just tuck it in the wetsuit and continue on as normal. Sometimes I'll take it off. But I understand what you're saying. You need to tell it that you've taken it off.
That's right, because otherwise it's going to count that insulin that you missed for the hour that you were surfing in your daily total. And, in fact, you didn't get that.
Yeah.
So then at midnight tonight, it's going to make a miscalculation thinking you got more insulin than you really did.
That's right.
So it is important if you're off the pump for longer than, say, 15, 20 minutes that you do suspend it. And I think it's easier to know to turn it back on again, because there's this really big banner across the bottom of your pump that says that you suspended. So you're less likely to miss it.
You know what I'm picking up here, Jane, is that it sounds like there's a lot of things you have to do with this pump that you didn't have to do before, like the carb counting, the ratios and all that sort of stuff. And
you were meant to do that before, Rob.
Okay. I was ordinary. I was a poorly behaved type 1 diabetic for a long time. No, actually, I was pretty good.
He was good.
Thought I was okay. I thought I was better than I was. But what the pump does give you is that an amazing freedom to do all this stuff. And sure, you have to calibrate. Sure, you have to count your carbs. And sure, you have to get the ratios right. But that's something that you really should have been getting right beforehand. And if you're not, then you know, you're up the creek without a paddle anyway. So, you know, this is not only given freedom to do everything and to get hungry and to be able to do all this stuff and to be able to go, I'm just going to go for a run with the guys. I'm going to play some touch footy. I'm going to do all this stuff, and I don't really have to worry about type 1 diabetes because the pump is worrying for me. Yeah. As long as I get a few simple things right, and that's just part of having type 1 diabetes. So, you know.
And the lovely thing is, if you do all this, like if you do your calibration and if you bolus 20 to 30 minutes before you eat, you can then just leave your pump in your pocket.
Yeah, and just say,
It's really, it's only going to ask you to get your pump out if something hasn't happened 100% right, like you've forgotten to calibrate or you didn't bolus soon enough, so your sugar's actually gone a little bit high, so it wants you to go do a correction.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So if you get those sort of successful behaviours in place, you'll find that you can leave your pocket in your pump.
It's pretty cool. It's like a mate. I mean, sometimes we have a Sunday every now and again where I'll just sit there on the couch in my undies and watch sport all day. And you just sit
Too much information.
Yeah, too much. So you just sit there with your little pump tucked into your dacks. It's just me and my buddy watching football, right? It's great.
Now, can I give you a couple of tips about how to get the most out of your sensors? Because I think I gave some of these to
yeah,
you.
go on then.
Okay. So number one, location.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So I think you're a side sleeper? A back sleeper.
Oh, if I'm on my back for longer than 2 hours, I get an elbow in the ribs to tell me to shut up.
Okay,
Stop snoring.
Snore.
Yeah.
Okay, so for example, if you sleep on your side, you don't want to have your sensor on your side. If you sleep on your back, you don't want to have your sensor on your bottom.
Yeah. You know what I've noticed? It sometimes if you go to sleep on the sensor, then the pump can say, hey, where's the sensor? Yeah,
because what happens, like when you squish, you know, if you sit down for too long, how your bottom becomes uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Because you cut off the circulation to your bottom.
Yeah.
So when you sleep on your sensor, you cut off the circulation. So it's going to read falsely low. So just remember that. Location. Now, I'm a middle-aged woman, so when I sit down, I've got a hill and I've got belly. So I would always, if I was going to put it on my tummy, which I wouldn't because I'm a tummy sleeper, but if I was going to put it on my tummy, it would be on top of the hill. It wouldn't be in the belly. You don't have that problem, Rob?
Yeah, well,
okay.
Come on, everyone's got hills and valleys.
So the next tip is, remember I taught you this, so that when you get your sensor ready, so you push your what's that firing thing called?
The launcher.
Introducer, the launcher. So you get your sensor, push it down on the table, you lift it off the platform, turn it upside down.
This is the Jane Overland technique.
Yeah. Because you know how you meant to insert it and then remove the tape?
The hardest thing ever was sticking that thing on and then having to, when you pull that tape off, you feel like you're tugging everything out of position, right?
Well, you're moving the sensor and the sensor doesn't like to be moved. So pull the tape off while it's still in the inserter.
Yeah.
Just gently pull it off. So then when you fire it, it's adhered.
Bang, and it sticks straight away.
Okay, and my other tip is on the inserter, you know how you put your thumb on your thumbprint when you're loading it?
Yep.
When you're putting it in, have your thumbprint pointing to the ground because then the sensor is positioned down the bottom and then you put the transmitter on top.
Click in from the top. It's much easier. Just go dink.
Yeah, and it also, that sort of gravity holds that sensor in place, whereas if you've got it on the side, it's sort of pulling the sensor down. So people get, much better wear by having the transmitter sitting on the top. So thumbprint pointing to the ground. And then, of course, when you go to bed with the 670, you always want to see the blue shield.
Yeah.
So you know you're in auto mode.
Yep.
And a full green circle, which means it's fully calibrated. It's not going to wake you up at 2 o'clock in the morning and ask for a calibration.
Sweet dreams.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So
I think we should take some questions. Are you ready for questions?
Questions.
Happy to do that.
Let's roll.
Okay, our first question. I don't want my A1C to rise. Are the target ranges adjustable or is there a set range for auto mode? So
firstly, yes, there is a set range in auto mode, which is 6.7. Now, it's really important to note that a blood glucose of 6.7 is not the same as an A1C of 6.7.
Yep, right.
Okay, they're measuring different things. Okay?
Yes.
So the target is 6.7. So it's going to, if you're dropping below that, it's going to try and bring you up. And if you're above that, it's going to try and bring you down.
The thing with the pump, right, that I found is that everything tightens up.
Yes.
Right? So your HbA1c could have been down here, but you're doing this a lot, right?
Yeah.
And then, so what happens is once the pump starts, your HbA1c will stay within that tight range. It tightens up. So even if it rises a little bit, that's actually not a bad thing. It's probably a better thing because
if your blood glucose
what it means is that you've eliminated all those lows that were dragging your HbA1c down. So no one wants, if your HbA1c is too low, it just means that you are having too many hypos.
Look, I had a woman who was using the Libra.
I'm not a doctor.
Okay. She was using the Libra, and she came to see me because she was worried that she had high blood glucose levels. Okay. So her A1C was a bit above target, but when I uploaded her Libra, she had 31 episodes of hypoglycemia in the last 2 weeks, and the average time of each episode of hypoglycemia was 131 minutes. Okay?
That's a long time to be stumbling through the fridge.
Okay. So in her case, she had a high HbA1c, and guess what we had to do to get her A1C better? Reduce her insulin. She's on about half the amount of insulin she was on.
Yeah, wow.
So raising the target of where you want to be so that you're not low and you're not high, you'll actually end up with a better A1C. If you've got an A1C that's at target now, that may not change, but you're achieving it in a much better way. You're going to, like you talked before about, it's not time within target that's important to you. It's time feeling well that's important to you.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Because there's nothing like a hypo hangover. That's just the worst thing ever. And then there's the high that comes after a hypo where you've overeaten, where you've just, and, if you're up and down, you spend so much of your day, feeling that grimy, grungy, rubbish feeling, it's not worth it. So to lift things up a little bit and then just go along your line within range as much as possible, it just feels better.
So if you were actually able to keep your glucose at 6.7 continuously, which it's actually not possible, but if you were, you'd have an A1C below 6%. You'd have an A1C probably about 5.5%, if not 5. So a glucose of 6.7 is not the same as an A1C of 6.7.
Great, thanks for clarifying that.
Cool.
Another question, how do I adjust for exercise?
Okay, so Rob, did you used to use a temporary basal when you exercise?
I use temporary basals for travelling on planes, long distance trips in cars, but I always struggled with the temporary basal after sport because I liked the feeling that I was pulling my glucose levels down to a lower level.
To a dangerously low level.
Yeah, based on what that lady said before, the question before about having a low HbA1c, that sort of instruction gets so ingrained in you that it's hard to release from. So as much as people will say you need your HbA1c or your A1c to rise a little bit, no one ever really wants to do it if you've been with diabetes long enough that the message has been so punched into you, right? So it's hard to let go of, but it's the right thing to do, right?
But you also need to achieve that HbA1c safely.
Correct.
So you can be concerned about the long-term complications of diabetes, but you've got to worry about the short-term problems of being hypo and maybe not making the best decision.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Sport, you don't want to have a hypo an hour and a half after sport because you weren't thinking about
And I've told you before that I've worn continuous glucose monitoring myself,
Yes.
and that I don't have diabetes. And I run quite low, so I don't know why. I've obviously got very good insulin sensitivity. I tend to sit around 3.5 most of the time. But when I had a midlife crisis about 10 years ago and I started running, my glucose would go up to 8.3.
You didn't buy a convertible?
I didn't buy it. Couldn't afford that.
Okay, right.
Just the running shoes.
Okay.
So my glucose would go up to 8.3. Okay, and that's normal because when your heart's pounding, your liver is releasing more
dump sugar on you.
Exactly, and you need it because your muscles are moving. And we do know from research that people with diabetes, like our elite athletes with diabetes, they perform best when their glucose is about 8.3. So on the 670 pump, the way to deal with exercise is you change the target. So you set a temporary target, comes up to 8.3.
Yeah.
Now, depending on what your glucose does with exercise, whether you set that target before you do the exercise, an hour before, at the beginning of exercise, or immediately after. And these are the sort of things that you need to talk to your diabetes healthcare.
You hone that as you go, right? Because you're not going to get the timing perfect on your first go. And I found the same thing with my carb.
Yeah.
you know, everyone will need a certain amount of time for things to work before.
And different sport affects you differently. Yeah. So, for example, when I run, my glucose goes up for the first hour, and then only once I've emptied my liver does it start to come down.
Yeah.
So perhaps if you're just going for a short run, you might not set the temporary target until you get back.
Yeah.
But there are other things that you might do, like bushwalking, and as soon as you start doing them, because your heart's not pounding,
yeah,
your glucose starts to trend down.
I noticed that actually.
Yeah, and therefore you might want to set that temp target sooner.
I'm a lazy mountain bike rider, so when I went mountain bike riding, I found my blood sugar was dropping all the time.
Yeah, so your strategy is going to be a temp target, but when you set that temp target, it may be different.
Yep, gotcha.
Great, thank you. Next question. I heard you can get exited out of the loop. What does this mean?
Do you want me to answer?
Kicked out of the loop. I've got a group of mates that we have a thing we call the loop. We all just talk to each other, and if you don't talk to the loop enough, they'll kick you out. But you better answer that.
That's actually a really good analogy, because I think we've sort of covered this during this webinar, but so if the pump has been giving you the maximum amount of insulin it feels safe to give you for 4 hours, or the minimum amount of insulin it feels safe for 2.5 hours.
It'll shut you down temporarily until you give it some information.
But it doesn't take you back to manual mode. It just puts you into a safe place for a period of time.
Yeah. Okay? Yeah, gotcha.
And then all you have to do is do what the pump tells you, which is usually a blood glucose, and you go back into the auto mode. So really, the only time you should be in manual mode is when you haven't got a functioning sensor.
Okay.
Yeah, do you agree with that?
Yep, good one.
Great.
Fantastic. Last question. Can I use this pump if I'm pregnant?
Do you want to answer that? No.
Not feeling like I'm ever going to have that.
Okay. So when you are pregnant, you have more litres of blood.
Congratulations, by the way.
So that the particles of glucose per litre of blood are lower. So a normal range when you're pregnant for your blood glucose is lower. Okay?
Sorry.
Not you. When you're
Stop talking to me about being pregnant. Right.
So when you're actually pregnant, you can use this pump, but you don't use auto mode. So you use the pump exactly as you would as a 640. You use the CGM, so you've got low glucose suspend, because especially within the first trimester, we worry about lows. So you can use this pump in auto mode getting ready for pregnancy.
Right.
Get your A1C down below 7%, then you're ready to conceive. Once you conceive, we'll take you out of auto mode, put you onto the same sort of manual mode with low glucose suspend, and then once Bubs is born, you go back to auto mode. And let's face it, when you've got a newborn, you really want to be able to put your pump in your pocket and just leave it alone. And leave it alone.
You are the last one that's going to get any attention.
Exactly. So you can still have this pump. You're just not going to use the auto mode feature while you're pregnant.
Yep, cool. Clear as mud. Clear as crystal.
Thank you. Well, that's it for this evening. Thanks again, Jane and Rob, for your experiences, your stories and your knowledge. And we look forward to catching up with you again really soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonia.
Good stuff. See ya.
Bye.